Good day and welcome to our online message for this week. My name is Deanne Carter and I serve as the pastor of Margarettsville and Lower Granville Baptist Churches. Today I want to invite you to look with me at a passage of scripture found in John 13, the first 17 verses. This is a very moving account of what happened the night before Jesus died. He gathered his disciples all together in an upper room, and he knew what was coming, but he wanted to celebrate the Passover with them. He knew his public ministry was over, and in close to 24 hours, he would hang on the cross and he would die. This was the beginning of the end of his physical life here on earth, his physical presence. And Jesus spent these last precious hours with his disciples. Even though he knew that he would be betrayed by one of them, that one of them would disown him, and that all of them would desert him for a time. Even though he knew all of this, he still wanted to be with them and to show them how much he still loved them. So let's look at how he showed this love, how he was trying to teach them and us what's truly important in life, and how we are to live as his followers. In our last two messages, we've looked at love and acceptance as two necessary characteristics in our fellowship as believers. Well, today I want us to look at the next two characteristics, that of honesty and humility, and how necessary these are among believers if we are to have genuine koinonia, that genuine fellowship that God so desires for us to experience. Charles Swindoll, in his book Koinonia, that I'm using as a guide for this series, he identifies what it means to be honest and humble in this context. And he looks at 6 truths as seen in our passage today that are part of the fabric of honesty and humility. So let's look at them together, shall we? The first truth that he draws our attention to is that honesty and humility, they must be prompted by love. Look at verse 1. It says, "It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." Jesus, he loved his disciples. They weren't perfect. They made a lot of mistakes, but Jesus still loved them. And we see in this verse that he loved them to the end. The idea behind the phrase "to the end," it means to the fullest extent, to the uttermost. There was no limit to his love. Even when facing an excruciating death, Jesus continued to love his disciples to the maximum. Even knowing how they were going to react, he loved them. He loved them to the fullest. He never failed doing or saying whatever was in their best interest. His love for them was selfless, and it was sacrificial. It was unwavering and unconditional. And you know something? As Jesus knew and loved his disciples so much, God knows and loves each one of us as well, in the same way. He knows the sins that we've committed. He knows the sins that we're going to commit. And yet, he still loves us to the end, to the uttermost. So, if we as followers of Jesus, if we're to follow his example, this means that we too will love others in this way. So, do we? Do we have this kind of love for others? This love will bind us together. It will inspire us to serve one another with sincere hearts. This love, it leads to humility and honesty. But love has to come first. It's the foundation upon which everything else grows and grows and grows some more. The second truth we see identified in this passage is that honesty and humility, they need no announcement. In other words, the individual who is being honest doesn't need to state the fact. They just need to simply speak the truth. And in the same way, the individual who is acting in humbleness wouldn't be very humble if they announced before they acted, hey, look at me. Look at what I'm doing. Jesus, he was a great teacher. His ways were amazing. He would often tell parables to help his listeners understand important concepts. Other times he would perform an action, knowing that the people of that day wouldn't miss the significance. But if they did, he would often go on to explain it to them. Look at verse 4. It says, "So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist." The disciples, they must have wondered, what is he doing? This is not a job that their master and their teacher should be performing. Washing the feet of guests was the job of the lowest servant in the household, not their master. But to Jesus, we see that no act of service was too low. And he was about to perform an act of great humility to teach them what was really important. You see, in Luke's account of this event, we see that the disciples, they had somehow entered the upper room without having their feet washed. And this was the custom of that day. In those days, sandals were the footwear of choice. And walking on the dusty roads means that their feet would get really dirty. Usually at meals, they ate at very low tables, something like our coffee tables today. And they didn't sit on chairs, but instead they would lean on pillows, and their feet would be out behind them. So this meant they could be easily seen and smelled if they were smelly. Wouldn't be a very nice environment to be eating in, would it? Well, as they were around the table in this state, they were arguing about who would betray Jesus and who was the greatest among them, because this is what was really important to them at this time. Who was going to betray him and who was the most important? Now, don't you think Jesus would have had every right to get angry with them? He had been with them. He had taught them for 3 years, and they still didn't get it. But he wasn't upset with them. He loved them. And remember, with love as our foundation, we act differently. If he did not possess love for them, he could have said, look, guys, smarten up. I'm going to show you what is important and demonstrate true humility to you. But he didn't. He wasn't judgmental. He wasn't prideful. He could have said, oh, well, I'm really angry at you and your selfishness right now, and I'm not going to speak to you for the rest of this meal. But he didn't. Instead, what does he do? He gets up and he prepares to wash their feet. Jesus didn't think of himself. He thought about his disciples, and he was loving them to the end with his actions and his words. The third truth we see is that honesty and humility, see beneath the surface. Jesus knew their greatest need, even if they didn't. It wasn't their need to know who was the greatest or to know who would betray him. Their greatest need was to know how to live, how to follow his example, and focus on what was truly important in life. So what does he do? Well, he gets started in washing their feet. Verse 5 says, after that he poured water into a basin and he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He was willing to serve. He was willing to do the job of the lowest servant in the house, because this is what was important. And this action, it revealed the heart attitude that Jesus wanted his disciples to have. He wanted them to have the true spirit of humility, to serve and to love one another, to have the mindset of selflessness, putting others' needs before their own. This was their greatest need. Mother Teresa has been told to have visited Phoenix in 1989 to open a house for the poor. And during that brief visit, she was interviewed by a large radio station in the town. And in a private moment, the announcer asked Mother Teresa if there was anything that he could do for her. And he was expecting her to request a contribution or media attention to help raise money for the new home for the needy. But instead she replied, yes, there is. Find somebody nobody else loves and love them. She knew this was his greatest need. He might not have been aware of it, though. Fourth, honesty and humility are as comfortable receiving as they are giving. Look at verses 6 to 8. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. Anyone have a difficult time accepting help or service from others? Most of us would rather give than receive, wouldn't we? We might feel embarrassed. We might feel unworthy. Or like Peter, we might feel uncomfortable. Our pride can rear its ugly little head, can it? And refuse help like Peter did. Refuse service. Peter said, you shall never wash my feet. But Jesus, with his gentle wisdom, explains why this act is necessary. And Peter's heart softens. And he quickly changes his mind, saying, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Do you see the shift from pride to humility? Peter recognizes his need for cleansing. Maybe some of us need to be open to this shift taking place in our lives as well. Being willing to humble ourselves and not just give, but receive too. If you think of a teeter-totter in a playground, for it to work, both sides need balance, doesn't it? The same is true in our fellowship. We must be comfortable not only in serving, but also in accepting help when we need it. And this helps to foster true fellowship among one another. Fifthly, honesty and humility are marks of strength, not weakness. We often get this one wrong too, don't we? We often think of someone who is humble as perhaps being weak. Maybe we see them as a doormat or not wanting to stand up for themselves. But this is not what's meant by humility. Here in this passage, we see Jesus humbly serving willingly. And when he comes to Peter and Peter's refusal, Jesus doesn't hesitate to confront his arrogance. He is blunt with him. Look at verse 8. It says, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Peter didn't get it yet. He still didn't understand that to be the leader, you had to be a servant. He didn't yet get that Jesus wanted his disciples to serve others. Their goal after he was gone was to continue Jesus' ministry. And this would be best done by being servants. They were to move out into the world. They were to serve God, to serve each other and all people as they took the gospel and the message of salvation. The late Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's hamburger chain, he's known for his humble service within this multi-billion-dollar empire. And when asked what made him so successful, he replied, my MBA. But he didn't mean a graduate degree in business education. He meant a mop and bucket attitude. In other words, no task was too insignificant for him to tackle. He simply jumped in and got the job done. Humility is not a sign of weakness. It's an amazing, amazing inner strength. Honesty and humility must be expressed before joy can come. It's only as we truly are honest and humble that we will experience genuine joy. Jesus says in verses 16 and 17, very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Dwight Moody has said this, the measure of a man is not how many servants he has, but how many men he serves. True, isn't it? Jesus showed by his own actions that serving others, demonstrating our love in tangible ways is of critical importance. Jesus considered it a priority, and so should we. So should we. May we go into this week practicing honesty and humility with our Lord's help. God bless each and every one of you. Thanks for joining with me today. Take care. See you next time.